Good afternoon. Ooh. So here we are. Everybody has a story. We're excited to have you here. Past member Thomas Parker Redick has a BA in history and philosophy and a JD from the University of Michigan. He has practiced international environmental law and sustainability for 37 years and recently as a global environmental ethics counsel. And he likes to tell stories to juries and international regulators. After moving back to Michigan a few years ago, he joined the Unsalted Tri-City Toastmaster group to hone his storytelling skills. And via a journal, he has traced the narrative arc of his life and will share some of his stories today in class. We will save questions for the end, and I will come around with the mic. So.
Can everyone hear me fine? You got me over there, yes? See what's all these messages on the computer. I don't want to install that. Okay, good morning, everyone. Tom Redick, I was already introduced, but I'll give you a little background as we go through my slides. I think telling stories is a very important subject. I'm glad you all showed up here today. And moving right along. How do you advance the slide? Oh, I got to do it on the screen. Did that advance? Am I active? Is it somewhere else? Oh, I found my mouse. So the screen isn't active, but the mouse is. All right, sorry about the technical issues. We'll talk about the history because frankly, storytelling goes back to when we were crawling around in the mud, oh, this mud is cold, so it's something that I think has evolved along with human beings. I'll talk about the personal aspects of this. Yes, I am Irish, 57%, and I do Toastmasters and public speaking a lot. I do believe the storytelling perspective can help you shape your life and then help you tell your life after you've lived a lot of it. And most people in the room have lived a lot of life. So it's time to start telling your grandkids what you did. Stories are also a tool for toasts. And when you do an interview or you meet a new friend, you just basically have to be able to say who you are and what you did. I'll talk about the tricks of the trade, the book. I think everyone got the How to Tell a Story book. There's a lot of handy little tricks. I'll sum those up for you and tell my perspective on them. And we'll talk about the no-nos because no one here wants to be canceled, right? Yeah, I don't know if that's actually a risk at our age, but you never know. So we're going to do 2 sessions, and I worked with Carol Crawford on this. We're going to basically, I'll talk now. I'll talk how stories shaped a life and give you all the tools. And we'll go for 75 minutes. So I'm going to suggest a 45-minute point. I'll ask if anybody needs a bio break, because I might. And we'll do a 2-minute break at 45 minutes, just in case. And in the second session, we're going to break into smaller groups and talk about the stories that we have written in the week between this session and next week. And I'll also give you an assignment to write at least 1 limerick. And it's not an either or. I want you to do both, but we'll work on that. So who am I? I'm this lawyer guy, but I have always been a storyteller in the sense that I viewed every case as, my story to dig up the facts and put them together and tell them. And actually, that's what I'm going to have you folks do. Dig up the facts of your life and figure out how they fit together and tell that story of how you got here today. I'm also a Toastmaster, and I'll put in a plug. I do this. I'm a retired, semi-retired. I still get a bunch of work on PFAS because I can't get rid of it. And I'm on the humor track, so if I do some humor, don't cancel me for it, please. I've been a public speaker. I lost count, so I'll just say 100. And sometimes they pay me, and I'm amazed because I'm doing this because people hire me. I'll do it for free, and they give me money, and I was like, "Isn't this double dipping?" Yeah. Okay. So I have a long line of Irish bards. The only one I've never met him, but I knew he existed, was my uncle Billy Flanagan in Ireland. And he lived to 170 years, 107, sorry, didn't make him Methuselah there. And my grandfather used to talk about him a lot because he said, yeah, he never married, he drank whiskey every day, he was homeless, but what he didn't tell us, he's an itinerant storyteller and fix-it guy. So he didn't have a house because he could just travel around Ireland. He'd fix the fence and he'd tell a story and get a meal, and maybe he was sleeping in the barn, but he got a place to sleep. It worked for him. My grandfather did create a family toast because he snuck a bottle of whiskey into Uncle Billy's nursing home when he was plus 100 years old. And Uncle Billy held it to his chest and said, "'tis a poultice on an inside disease." And my grandfather just liked that. And so now whenever we toast each other, that's what we say. And I'll talk about accents later because trust me, I just heard Mark Maron, the comedian on NPR, talking about how, yeah, he mimicked a Chinese person and got almost canceled for it. So yeah, you make fun of your Irish relatives, but it's tricky. And if there's any Irishmen offended, I will walk out with you and explain, yeah, my grandfather was that crazy. So how does a story shape a life? I do think a narrative perspective lets you look at what you did and get a little distance from the bad stuff. And if life gives you lemons, you make lemonade, and you also will tell a story. So stuff that is really bad sometimes makes a very good story. There are a lot of memoirs that are based on some really bad stuff that happened to people as children. There's parallels in Christian theology that it gives you a perspective in life that maybe you realize this is just God's will. And the Alcoholics Anonymous adopted that and made it a higher power, and it works really well for them. So storytelling through the ages, trust me, we've been telling stories as long as we've been human beings. This is just a part of humanity that, it started out with maybe two food tubes in the ocean said, oh, look, there's better food over here. Or, two monkeys in a tree saying, hey, look at the fruit over there. Let's go. So it belongs in the world of language, and we do have language, and most of the other people do sign language. The dogs, frankly, have a lot of words. I'm pretty sure of that, but we just don't speak dog yet. So, we'll figure it out. We can, early on, Plato, he was living at the time when they first had writing, and they're writing things down. And he said, wait a minute, doesn't this writing down stuff actually make us forget? Isn't that inducing forgetfulness? Because we used to be, for most of humanity's life, it was passed down orally, right? And you train the next bard by talking to him about everything he's supposed to know, and he's supposed to remember it. The monks used to memorize the Bible by making little cathedrals in their head, memory cathedrals, But Plato was like, hey, this is a bad idea, right? And the interesting thing is, the only reason I get to know Plato had this because somebody wrote it down. Right? I mean, okay, sure, Plato, but you know what? It's making human history that we can actually reach back and record. And we actually now know that Jesus was alive because Josephus, a historian, wrote about him. And we know that writing is something that helps shape our culture. I mean, a lot of litigation involves what somebody wrote down now, and it's something that we can't get away from. We are moving into a world, though, where some of this stuff does induce memory loss. I got a GPS, and I used to have the best sense of direction in anywhere. My wife had none, and she thanked GPS for coming along. And once she drove to Mexico with the kids by accident, and that was a horrible event. But she thanked GPS for rescuing her from her terribleness. But what it did is it killed the brain cells, because I now can just check my phone to get somewhere. And I have a whole bunch of stories of how it led me astray, right? I'm stuck in a cornfield in Iowa or somewhere in New Haven, Connecticut, trying to get my daughter's graduation, and the thing doesn't work or whatever, So we're in a situation where it really did, Plato was right. Something did happen here with the technology. And we are in the age where artificial intelligence is coming along. I'm a professor at Western Michigan, and we're struggling now with this ChatGPT. Lets a student write an essay and bring it in and call it his, right? And some professors think, well, we should just go back to everybody writing it in the class. And we still haven't figured out exactly what we're going to do with AI in education. Yes, sir. Oh. Oh, sure. ChatGPT is a new artificial intelligence program that was developed in open source kind of way. And it basically lets you, it will write an essay. Actually, there's one of these guys working at my first law firm I ever worked for. They just hired in the starting class an artificial intelligence to work side by side with the lawyers. And so far, so good. He works 24/7, 365, and he's 90% as good as a human, but he's worked so hard that maybe he's going to be there. And if you look in the investment banks, are hiring these folks more than they hire people now. So they're really, maybe they're taking over the world. I don't know. Maybe they're nice. I don't know that either. So I actually, in terms of this narrative perspective, I had a really epic problem one Christmas when I was preparing the first genetically modified organism personal injury case in San Diego. And I had three really smart Stanford, Harvard type lawyer people who were all women working for me. I'm a senior associate, they're junior associates. And this partner comes in from the San Francisco office where he had a bad history that we only learned later that he punched somebody in the face who'd argue with him. Here we go. I've got to get ready in mid-December for 3 huge trials in a $1 billion lawsuit, right? And this guy shows up and starts molesting or harassing, just basically being a jerk to these 3 women. And they all quit. Every one of them said, enough of this. I can't, I didn't come here to be harassed by this person. And they all sued the company. And I'm stuck with 3 trials that I have to be the person that tripled my workload in a heartbeat. And there I go. I've got to work through Christmas. Okay. And I have little kids, and it was a very miserable experience. But I did think, well, someday I'll tell somebody about this. This guy was a real jerk. He hit on my sister at my 1-year-old's birthday party. I'm like, come on, what do you do with a guy like that? So if you have a perspective, does help you tell a story sometimes. I have another story of my daughter who, we would tell bedtime stories to get them to sleep. And my wife loves to drag us along on shopping trips, and we just sit on couches bored, and we'd tell stories. And suddenly the couch, which had leather, would become the skin of a selkie, which would take my daughter sitting on it, would turn her into a selkie, and she'd become a seal. Selkie is an Irish myth of people who become seals, and they can take their skin off and have a lot of fun. Well, I didn't realize in telling my daughter all these stories that she would start to take them too seriously. And my wife called me and said, you know what? Your daughter got sent home from preschool today for whooping cough. And guess what? She was doing her seal imitation again. I didn't tell the preschool teacher. So stories do go awry, Obama's not born in America, right? He's not born in Hawaii. He's born in Africa somewhere. So it's dangerous. There are tools here that we have for various aspects. So one thing that I've had to do in my life is toasts at my little brother's weddings, right? And the trick is to tell a story that sums up their facts and sums up everything that was funny that happened, and give a little story about it. Same thing with interviews. I mean, if you treat the interview as I'm telling a story about what I am and what I could do for this company, it gives you a little bit more compelling story. And in a date, you go on a date, and what you have to do is start to tell your story, not too much and not that thing, right? But you tell the story of yourself. I live in an Irish clan where if we don't have somebody telling a story, it's not an Irish meeting. I mean, it's not a family meeting. And it's something that if you have a perspective on how to do this right, it will help you in every corner of your life. And at our age, right, we're the senior professionals, right? It is something that by recording some of the things that happen to you, and I don't mean tape recording, but by writing it down and figuring out what kind of story can I tell my grandkids or my kids, and or my nieces and nephews. So understand that a story is got a beginning and end and a middle, and it's not just an anecdote. Everybody tells anecdotes, but if you're going to show up at the Moth and do a 5 minutes, you'd better have a beginning and an end, and you better know those very well. And journalism gave us the where, what, when, and that is basically a good way to start writing a story, is to follow those rules. Each of these events that you pull out of your mind is going to be able to be something you can expand on. How did you feel emotionally when you had this event? How were you affected, and what did you do to react to this? And key thing is, what were the stakes involved in this story? How are you changed, and did you become a different person for having endured that? Some of the tricks to mine your memories that are based on senses, like odor and taste, are a great way to trigger memories. Proust had a cookie that he stuck in the Madeleine that he stuck in his tea, and boom, there it go. He's got remembers of things, whatever. I went back after 20 years to my high school reunion and took a walk through my hometown, and boy, did that trigger a lot of memories. And in the book, they recommend just start writing down memories, 5, 10, 15, 20, go up to 100 if you have to. Make a lot of different memories on paper. And after you put them on paper, you then start to find things that connect, beginnings and ends, that you can make a story. So in terms of the memory lists, you could start talking about what are the key scents that trigger your memory? Does the smell of a chocolate chip cookie remind you of your mother? Are there horrible smells that remind you of something terrible? Touch and taste may be part of it too. And I'm a big fan of music triggering memory. So I think I've got a song, sort of a soundtrack of my life, and certain songs I hear remind me of a certain event. And I'm big on mixed CDs that sum that up. And in every time you're doing this, you need to focus on, how did you feel? That's what a story is all about. Triggering emotion. How did you feel? How did you react? So I'll walk through some of the events or the story elements that we have in the book and in my own experience. And I'm just summing up here what the 6 things I'll talk to. There's conflict and tension, surprise and its cousin suspense, quirky characters, controversy. There's plenty of that around. And those English majors know what I'm talking about when I say dramatic irony. And then mystery, which is a wonderful thing if you can make it happen. In terms of conflict and tension, it may be just something mundane. Say your wife is really needs a clean kitchen, right? But the foodie hubby wants to have his garden club over to cook their harvest lunch, and make a nice salad and soup and out of all the things they grew. The tension there is, can he get the kitchen clean enough to let her know he never did this? And, yeah, that's a challenge. I'm a big fan of Lord of the Rings, and I got to wonder, how did Frodo walk all those miles with all those things chasing him? He's got, weird riders, and they're on pterodactyls all of a sudden. And wow, he somehow disobeyed this semi-disembodied spirit, which is the same thing in Harry Potter, semi-disembodied spirit, but got to go around and get Horcrux. It's all the same story over and over, right? And these are the sort of conflicts that create stories. The conflict is the ridiculous idea of a smallest person in the planet walking to throw a ring across this horrible place. That's pretty, wow, he did it. Okay. I think artificial intelligence will show up, and frankly, that's a big story of America now. How are we going to figure out when they build that robot army, how to turn them off? And conflict in this setting can be personal, right? I mean, I had the horrible boss, right? Or it can be something relating to your animals. If you have if you're like Hagrid in the Harry Potter, you have a pet, I can't remember all the mythical crazy thing. And if it's a social sort of novel or a story you want to talk about overcoming some social mores, something in society, could be a natural story. Into Thin Air is a great book about Everest expedition gone completely wrong, and the man's calling his wife who's pregnant with their daughter while he's freezing to death on that stupid mountain. And it's very much a very compelling story. We're going to see more hurricane stories as global climate change gives us bomb cyclones every other day. And the weather is certainly something that could be a conflict. And good old Frodo, he's always good for a conflict. There's a surprise in a lot of these stories. And if you can build in some surprise so that like Hitchcock did in Psycho, where, wow, that crazy stabbing lady and the old lady is actually Tony Perkins. Hello. In the comedy setting, you see there was a really good Seinfeld episode once where George Costanza, to get a date, he told the story. It was a great story of being a marine biologist, and he got the date. But then he has to prove he's a marine biologist. Meanwhile, Kramer's just hitting golf balls willy-nilly all over New York. Well, he ends up at the beach with a beach whale, and his marine biologist kicks in and grabs the golf ball out of the blowhole of the whale, which had been apparently drowned by Kramer hitting a golf ball into his blowhole. I mean, it was a bizarre surprise, but it was still a very good use of surprise. I saw a great movie with Matthew Broderick called Glory, where he was a abolitionist colonel who formed a troop of black soldiers who everyone said, no, they can't fight. And sure enough, they surprised everybody and ran up and took Fort Wagner. Well, didn't take Fort Wagner, but died trying. The ultimate surprise in my world, I almost wore my Star Wars Darth Vader sweater today, but I was told that wouldn't be appropriate. That, when Luke says, I'm your father, wow, okay. That's a big surprise. And the other surprise, he kissed his sister. Oh. So suspense is something where you have surprise, but it's not really it's more like fear. So there's always going to be, in a good thriller, you have some bad guy chasing the hero. But will the hobbits escape these black riders who are chasing them all over the Shire, right? And it doesn't have to be a person. It could be Scarlet holding on to Tara against all these enemies that are trying to take her land away, right? The more recent book with Robert Langdon evading this evil white Catholic Church assassin because he's got the secret to Jesus. I don't know. There's ways to build suspense, and it involves usually someone chasing somebody. And I still wonder, is AI going to take over the world? Quirky characters, if you need practice in seeing a quirky character, read some Dickens, because he did a lot of kooky people. Rowling's Harry Potter book has a bunch of very quirky characters. That's what makes it a wonderful little book. It doesn't have to necessarily be their characteristics. You can be a perfectly good doctor, but you eat people, and that's not good. So Hannibal Lecter made an excellent quirky character. And shipwreck folks and people in aircraft crashes are still eating people, so it's not going away as an issue. In terms of eating, I was asked to teach in southwestern China next year in May, and I learned from a friend of mine who traveled in China that they have a really fun dish there called Eat 3 Squeals, which involves newborn mice that they squeal when you pick them up, they squeal in the hot oil, and they squeal when you bite down, and that is called Eat 3 Squeals. It is a real thing. I am probably going to have to eat it to prove that I'm not some weird American who doesn't like Chinese food. There's quirky characters in Seinfeld, like Kramer, the guy hitting the golf balls. And the other Kramer I love is in the 50s. What is it? Honeymooners in the 50s. Back, will I find a treasure in the sewer? Yeah. Moving on to dramatic irony. Now, this is where the joke's on the character, and everybody in the room knows what's going on except this poor guy, right? Like Romeo, he assumes, oh my gosh, Juliet's dead, and she's so beautiful, and doesn't think to check a pulse. He just thinks, oh, she's so beautiful, and she's dead. And he assumes too much and eats the poison and kills himself in erroneous grief, and makes for a very good story. So dramatic irony is something like the Trojan horse, when, the Greeks said, here is a nice horse, and sorry, we put a bunch of people inside that are going to kill you in your sleep. I'm very interested in this Civil War story where Stonewall Jackson flanked the Union Army and rolled up the flank at Chancellorsville, where he was, and he also got killed by his own troops because he succeeded too well. He got between the lines. There's another story that involves my great-great-grandfather and this little Ohio unit, which was stuck on the flank where they're going to be the first people to be shot when Stonewall Jackson comes out of the woods, right? But somehow they had 6 different officers who all got on a horse and rode out to see what's going on out there. Who are those people walking? You know, they actually found them. All the Stonewall Jackson, 20,000 people are walking through Virginia, and they figured it out by going out there and getting shot at. And they went back to General Fighting Joe Hooker, who, by the way, has twice as many troops as the rebels. And the only way they're going to beat him is to totally surprise him in this way. And Stonewall Jackson is a genius because he knows this Fighting Joe Hooker isn't going to go kill Robert E. Lee while he's splitting the army in half and running around the side. Well, after all these Ohio people warned him, these generals were like, no, don't talk to us, you stupid people. And a lot of them were German, and they were really biased against Germans. So they said, you crowds don't know, you're a bunch of chickens. Well, he didn't attack. He didn't listen to the warnings. And when all hell broke loose, you had the 75th Ohio dug in and ready to fight, right? And everybody else is eating steak and taking naps because they ate too much steak and generally not getting ready. And bazoomba, here they come. In the movie that Ted Turner did, which, by the way, didn't tell any of the story that I'm telling you, it just told the story of how great Stonewall is. First you see the birds, and then the deer, and then the foxes, and everybody's running out of the woods, and then come the rebel army, and then all the Germans on the right get killed, and all the Ohio guys go, oh my God, now we've got a bunch of rebels on our right. So there was a guy in this battle who got the Medal of Honor for figuring out how to shoot his cannon both sideways and while backing up, and not get killed. By the way, he lived through the war and became the governor of Ohio. And he was forced into that situation by the stupidity of the general. He was one of the guys who ran out and seen the people, and he rode back and he said, get out of our face, you stupid German. And, these are stories that need to be told, because Ted Turner had a rebel grandfather and decided to tell this story and make a major motion picture and not even share what I think is an interesting story of a dumb general. Now, what happened to the dumb general? He's standing there shooting his own men when a cannonball, because they're running away and they're bad men, right? Even though he's the one who induced this problem. And a cannonball kind of rolls off, hits the house, rolls off, and knocks him in the head, and knocks him right out. So sorry, Fighting Joe, you won't live to fight another day, because when Lincoln heard about this disaster, he fired the Fighting Joe. Controversy is another one of the 6 things I'm going to talk about. Now, there's a public conflict now. I've done a couple of presentations on climate change issues, and I admit I was a climate denier in the 90s, partly because my brother-in-law told me it was just solar flares and El Nino, so I believed him. And that is certainly something that is a controversy that could be. I've read a book that actually did an excellent job of summing up that controversy into sort of a science fiction novel. The biblical justification for slavery is another controversy back 150 years ago. Part of the Civil War solved that problem. And we even today have a biblical justification for gays that, frankly, I did a half session on churches recently and ended up talking with ministers afterward about the question of, does the Bible actually say gays are sinful, or is this something that we should address as all sinners are loved by Christ, right? The GMOs is a genetically modified organism. And for most of my career's speeches, I have dealt with opposition, and actually my international meetings were all about GMO regulation. And OMG is their reference, GMO's OMG. And I'll talk later about texting and no-nos, because some texts actually incorporate the F word. So you have to be careful what you text. So mystery is a fun thing. I love to read mysteries. There's a lot of living mysteries, like what really caused COVID-19. We're still teasing through all the different aspects of that recent debacle. Who was Jack the Ripper? No one knows, and everybody's been trying to find out for a very long time. We still don't know where Cleopatra's tomb is. some of the current mysteries that I've tried to solve in litigation was, first of all, with vaccines, did they cause autism? And we dug deeply into that and found out that all the research that had been done on that was fraudulent, and it actually caused a lot of problems. But now they're litigating the metals, and we're looking at that, whether metals might be triggering this. I have a personal mystery that I solved when I was a kid. I was catching catfish with my brother in my grandfather's pond, and I thought, those whiskers, how do they come? And one day after lunch, I was walking down with my fishing pole, and I see my grandfather with a bag, and there's a brick in the bottom of the bag, and there's something wriggling, and he's getting rid of the barn cats, the kittens that were born that he didn't need, and he throws them in the pond. And I said, I know. The kittens are giving the catfish those whiskers. So I told this to my brother, and he said, you are a bigger idiot than I've ever met in my entire life. The whiskers help them find the bottom where they eat a bunch of weird stuff. So I had another story for my family that I told in a Muskegon storytelling jam or whatever. We went out to Kansas City where my mother-in-law lives, and my mother-in-law is raising my nephew because my schizophrenic sister-in-law, who, to her credit, played her trumpet. She's a jazz musician at my wedding, has a son that she's not really able to raise very well, and so the grandparents are raising the kid. So I step out on the back porch on a barbecue on Labor Day, and there is an 8-foot tall pot plant living by itself in a pot on the back porch. And I was, this is in 1990, or maybe around 99. And nobody had legalized anything in the pot world. Nobody had medicalized even anything in the pot world. Pot was then a Schedule I narcotic that would trigger loss of the property under federal forfeiture laws. And I called the wife out and said, look at this pot on the back porch. She said, yeah, it sure is. So we called the mom out, and she said, no, I'm not growing it. It must be my son. And so we get Daniel out, and he says, yeah, I grew it, and I'm going to sell it for $2,500 or more on the open market and make a lot of money. And we said, well, Daniel, you know, if the federal government gets it first, you'll sell your house at, and you won't have anywhere to live. He said, it doesn't matter. I'll be in juvie hall. So it's okay. We finally decided Daniel was not going to let go his pot plant barely. I didn't want to dig it up myself. And I thought, well, Sauna, the schizophrenic, send an email to all your jazz musician buddies and tell them, free pot, just come to grandma's house, right? And she sent the email. I made her go, and I watched her send it. And then I'm sleeping on the couch in the living room, and there's a back porch with a big, screen door and a glass sliding door, and an auto light that comes on, and the dog starts barking. And here comes Santa Claus. Okay, this guy with a white beard starts digging it up, and I recognize him as my friend Jazzbo, who's Bill Hargraves. He's a jazz musician in Kansas City who plays Santa Claus at the Crown Center, and had told me more than once that I can't sit through 8 hours of snot-nosed kids without twisting up a number first. And I'm stoned every time I go in there. I said, do the mommies know this? And he said, I hope not. Well, so it turns out when we pressed Daniel a little more, at first he said he got him on the internet. I said, nobody buys seeds on the internet. And he said, well, I got him, I grabbed a handful off Jazzbo's tray when I was visiting him at the Renaissance Festival. So we solved this mystery, and it was Santa Claus who stole the pot. Well, you want to create a realistic character. You give people enough information so that they identify with the person, make them memorable. If they have a unique voice, to use that, and definitely dialogue is always a good way, as opposed to narrative, to build in a story. Have people talking to each other. You want to try to develop the ability to write a really warm expression, something that triggers some emotion. If there's body language involved, then use the body language. All of this adds up to a person who's got some goal, some stakes in his life that he's got to solve, right? And something that's perplexing and intriguing, added to these memorable people makes for a good story. And I'm a fan of telling about appearance. Tell people what they look like, let them know what the kind of person they're dealing with. So in the book, they talk about mining memories, and you could pull out your tea and cookies like Proust does, or you could just start writing them down and ask, what did this mean to me? What about this moment was important to me? You want to look for patterns in your story, and all the twists and turns that led up to a big decision, right? Something that was maybe embarrassing. A lot of the best stories are about an embarrassing moment, or somebody made a mistake and here's why. And explaining how it went miserably wrong helps us to understand how not to ourselves do things in a miserably wrong manner. So there are prompts to consider if you're stuck. So if your life was a movie, what's one scene you'll never forget? That's a way to think. Actually, my schizophrenic sister-in-law only played songs at my wedding because I told her, it's just a movie. Just pretend you're in a movie and you're being filmed. And there's none of it's really, real, right? So that actually worked for her. What is something somebody said to you that you'll never forget? There may be elements of your life that are based on somebody telling you something, right? In terms of a prompt, think about what a breakthrough moment might have been. When you had that moment where you finally, what you went to college started to pay off in some way. And tell of a time you followed your heart. How did you know you had to get married? How did you know to leave that job and move on? Or be reunited with treasure. Like I will now tell the story of my 1997 Michigan football championship sweatshirt. I came to my 20th reunion and I discovered this treasure on sale at the Frandor shopping, not Frandor, it was Meridian Mall. The JCPenney had 75% off for sweatshirts that had the Michigan championship on them, which frankly were high priced around the time they won the championship, but now they've sat at JCPenney in East Lansing where all the state fans are like, I'm not going to buy that t-shirt. Give me a break. So some buyer made a mistake and bought a bunch of Michigan things and stuck them in East Lansing. Well, I ended up getting 20 of those, and I worn mine so much it turns into a rag, and I just clean up paint messes with it now. But my brother stuck his in the closet and only wore it when they were playing for the championship or something. And it was a pristine copy of what I destroyed by use. And so my brother, for my birthday, packed it up and gave it to me back. And I got reunited with a nice t-shirt or sweatshirt, I should say. And I did not wear that today either, though I was tempted. Good ideas are something that you need to nurture. So after you write them down, you got to sum them up in some way. Put a magnifying glass, blow it up, and where were you physically? What were you doing that day? How'd this impact your life? And what was the outcome, The example they use is this disaster taught me how important my father was in our community. And I moved to Michigan in 2017, mainly because my little brother had just died of ALS, and my father was not even getting out of bed, according to my brother who lives here. And I decided, my brother, by the way, was not allowed in the house of my father because my father's a bit of a hoarder, and my brother tried to clean up and threw away his tax returns. So that led to a breach in, they didn't let him in the house. So I moved in promising never to clean up his tax returns, at least. And it did show me that my father really was very important in our community. He was a HAS member. Some of you may have met Milt at a HAS meeting. He's the one who got me involved in HAS because he was an old guy already living here. And he said, HAS was really cool. We got to go down and do. Okay. So structure is something I can't emphasize enough. It's something that a lot of folks tell a good story, but they're rambling. And there's got to be a beginning, a middle, an end. I usually write it down on index cards, and Moth won't even let you bring those in. So you have to memorize what was your 5-6 points, right? And people really want to take this journey with you, but it's got to make sense. It's got to follow one thing to the other in a logical way. you plant the seeds and you set the stage, maybe foreshadow some of the events, and they'll sprout later. And you have to be careful. You want to write something you can actually finish. And if you set your goals too high or you got baggage holding you down, you just need to focus on what is the elements of the story I can tell in the time I'm being given. And the key here is to set some unanswered questions that they'll keep reading to find out why. And yep, you changed. A moment when you do your story and you figure out, well, this is where I really became what I am now. You can easily see how to get to there. You show what changed me and what teachers helped me, what elements of what did my spouse do that helped me, what did her father or whatever it may be. And every story is going to end in a different place, but it's got to have some element of you transforming. And Moth is a memorization world. So if you're taking this class because you'd like to be on Moth and tell a 5-minute story someday, I know I do. So they have a requirement that you memorize the story and you tell it by heart. And I actually, most of the time at Toastmasters, don't use a PowerPoint because I can work on just getting things done without notes or paper. And at the point you know your story well enough, you can tell it in your sleep, right? And nobody wants to sit and watch you panic and lost for what was the next thing? And what I'll do is make an outline, and I have bullet points on little index cards. And as I'm going through it, I hone it. And when you're in this mode of memorizing, you'll find you do it 5 times and you do it 5 different ways, right? And there's some things, and actually as you're doing it, things come to mind, that you should have remembered. And practice is something that actually you definitely have to have practice. So a story it's a living thing, and the structure is going to give it life. And if you memorize it verbatim, you're just going to sound stiff. So you have to keep at summing it up in a way that you can actually remember and get comfortable with it, right? And you try not to forget the middle thing. I think there was a fish called Wanda. There was a thief who kept forgetting the middle thing. You don't want to be the person who is in the middle and forgets. And one of the key things is the exact words you're going to use for beginning is something that always you should know, almost by heart, and ditto for the last. And I'm a big fan of numbered index cards. In terms of how to use language, a lot of English teachers are big on short, punchy, drive it with a short, punchy line. But I think there's elements of rhythm, and in a storytelling, you're an oral setting. The pace that you give your story helps to make emphasis. And I'm a fan of colorful language. If you have to run on a little to tell your colorful language, go for it. But vary it with some short and sweet intervening parts. We are going to write a haiku, and so I will urge all of you to take, it's the basic rule is it's 5 syllables, 7 syllables, 5 syllables, right? And this comes from Japan. And I wrote a haiku. Tom taught them writing, that's 5 syllables. They thought him incompetent, that's 7. And left him for dead, there's 5. So try a few of these and bring some next week, and we'll talk about them in small groups. You don't have to write more than one, but if you get inspired, write 7 more. There's tools that you can use in building this story, and that is setting. You got to tell people what they're going to be doing, where they're going to be doing this, what's happening in the world. And this allows you to use the colorful language. You can have a bright sunny day or a dark stormy night, right? I'm a big fan until this morning when I was delayed by the snowfall in a truck that turned sideways. The gentle fall of snow is, for me, a very evocative and wonderful thing until it causes problems. A meadow full of flowers that gives you a chance to talk about the smell and the sights. And I'm a big fan of green Irish landscapes, and any story told on those instantly has my attention. I recommend to you all Dairy Girls on Netflix. It's a really funny show with Irish people in it. If you can understand them, a lot of people need to turn on the settings, turn on the words below. I'm a big fan of fetid swamps and croaking frogs. That's always a great place to tell a story. Now, the first sentences really do matter. And the example they give of a first sentence that doesn't work is, well, I was thinking about climbing this mountain, but then I watched a little TV and made a snack and took a nap, and my mom called and I vented about her story. I said, then I did a little laundry. Oh, it was a white load. I lost another sock, darn it. And then I thought about it and I decided to climb the mountain next morning. No, that is not a good kicking start, right? That's more of a ramble. This is how they'd like you to write it. The mountain loomed before me. I had my hunting knife, some trail mix, and snow boots. I had to make it to the little cabin and start a fire before sundown, or I would freeze to death for sure. Now that sets the stakes of the story. He's got to get to that place and make a fire, right? So when you sum up your story, you set the stage and you give people just enough information so they know they want to sit for this 5 minutes or however long you're telling the story. Steer clear of meandering endings too. They will kill your story. The last line should be something, once again, that you memorize to the point you can say it. You don't have to say it the same way out, but you get the key elements of that sentence are in your mind when you tell the first sentence, right? To bring people to that point. And if you sit there and kind of ramble and fizzle out at the end, it just doesn't make a good impression on the story. Keep your hands on the wheel and go to your destination. But in say if you're home at a dinner and you're telling a story, it's not about you, right? You know, don't be offended if people kind of interrupt you and you don't get to finish your story until maybe later when you're having coffee and dessert. It's not about taking the spotlight for the entire time. I'm a spotlight taker. I admit it. I confess. My wife used to say, "Why are you always trying to be the center of attention?" Well, it's because I'm a good center of attention. I don't know. I don't know. Maybe I should shut up sometimes. You want to have a jumping off point for someone to share their own story. So let other people in. Also, I actually have some instances of this now that I'm trying to write my father's memoirs. If you're not ready to share a story, you know, you might have to set it aside and come back to when you are ready. And there's an element of this that can trigger even post-traumatic stress syndrome. So if it's tough to find an ending and you're really struggling to get through this, you want to just kind of press pause and you will return to the story when you've had more time to process. And I frankly have a problem now writing my memoir of my father that some of my relatives really aren't ready to hear this story. So if you see signs that your memory doesn't match your family members, well, no surprise. Frankly, I can say as an attorney, I'll have 10 people who saw the same thing and I'll have 10 different stories. So memories vary. And the classic example of this in a memoir recently is this Augustin Burroughs, who wrote The Running with Scissors. It was made into a motion picture. And he was sued by the family that he had gone to live with, who he wrote kind of meanly about. And they ended up settling, and he ended up saying basically he stood by his story except for some of the chronology points. So, you know, it's something that you don't want to get involved in litigating with your family. But then again, I would, at the bottom line is I'd say write it down and then figure it out later, whether it's something you can tell or can't tell. We're at about a 45 minutes. Does anybody need a bio break? Because I'd be happy to shut it down for 2 minutes if we have anyone who needs to take a break. I'm okay. If you're all okay, we'll keep going. And you can, we aren't holding the questions to the end. If you have questions, do feel free to raise your hand and let me know. So I mentioned this, and the reason, one of the big things holding up my memoir is that I have an aunt who had a terrible event. The year I was born in 1959, her teenage daughter was killed by her boyfriend, who killed himself too, by doing carbon monoxide in a garage. That she never recovered from that over many years of grief. And it's something that I compare my dad, who did have terrible things happen and did recover and did, you know, still was a good father. There's cousins I have who might object if I actually use that example. right? That's their mom I'm talking about, right? So you have to navigate these issues. Even if it's true, it may not be comfortable for some folks. And I urge you all to find that hidden poet that is buried deep inside you. There's words you can use that are beautiful. They might inspire someone or amuse them, engaging them, and try to be evocative in what sounds good to your ear, and then write down words until it sounds good. And I'm a big fan of bringing some rhythm so that the basic different speeds and different pauses that will really help engage your audience. Some of the other tricks of the trade are, don't forget structure, but there's alliteration, which is starting the cat climbed and crawled toward the whatever, the first letter, and that can be good. Foreshadowing is something that I commend to all of you. If you can give a little hint at the start of your story to how it's gonna end, practice doing that when you are trying to write a story for next week. I'm a big fan of metaphors. I had a nickname some girls gave me in the dorm in college, the pink slab of meat. That was a metaphor. I'm not a pink slab of meat. I'm not even like a pink slab of meat. That's a simile, right? And you can keep the people smiling if you're writing things that make them feel like, this person knows what they're doing here. There's key things you have to remember, and this is the cancellation moment, so please pay attention. There are filler words that or ums and stuff. I actually count these for my church minister, and he hit 108 and I set a record once. And there's ummers that by saying you're saying, I'm not really sure what I'm supposed to say. All right. You just give a pause and you look like you're a genius. You're just kind of pausing for emphatically pausing. And cursing may work for comics, but it doesn't work for public stories. And that includes texting. The OMFG is the adding the F word to the oh my God, right? And Mr. was it Hamlin? Yeah, the safety of the Bills, who died on the field and then was recovered, texted during a playoff game OMFG with 20 exclamation points and got a lot of pushback from folks who said, wait a minute, you're using the F word in relation to this deity. That's not good. Even though it was just a text, it was a very dangerous text to throw in. My father actually shared my disgust for the F word, and he used to complain about, my brother-in-law and my kids and people would use the F-bomb, right? But he would use it for emphasis or whatever, and I was like, isn't that a little hypocritical? If you're dissing my kids, you shouldn't be spitting that nasty word out. And my brother and I came up with this solution. Whenever Milton said an F-bomb, we would shun him for 10 minutes. He could talk to us, but we wouldn't pay any attention until he, figured out he shouldn't be using the F-bomb, and at least when we can hear it. And it actually helped him get rid of that nasty habit of hypocritically saying the F word. The other things we have to worry about to avoid cancelization would be sexism. I'm sure that applies to women. Can't be sexist toward us either, even though we're the ones who've been we invented that word because we were so sexist to you guys. The racism is something that Cosmo Kramer got sideways doing a speech, and he went sideways with the N-word. Homophobia also, fat shaming, ageism. Thank God they have that for us old folks, right? Then these are the things that when you're practicing, you'll figure out I shouldn't have that. Like I shouldn't have had that OMG when I did the GMOs, right? But I decided to keep it as an example. Kind of like my father saying that F word was for example emphasis, right? Accents are something. Today, driving in the snow, I heard Mark Maron talk about how he imitated a Chinese person once early in his comedy career and got a lot of pushback and decided, I don't like it, doing accents that offend people. So don't generally try an accent, although I'm cursed by having done my Irish accent for my poultice. So there are situations that you can do an accent and get away with it, but be careful. And another thing they list is don't celebrate unwanted sexual advances. And you would think in the age of Me Too, that would be the subject of a lot of moth stories, but it's not going to be a subject of moth stories. The other aspect is when you adopt like a character and you decide you're going to make their gender, class, race, body type, or political position a key plot point. If it's just thrown in for color, don't use that. But if it's necessary to explain the story about your crazy uncle, right? Yeah, maybe you need to have that in there. So be careful you don't get canceled. And with fake accents, it's clear that when I do it for my Irish relatives, it's kind of okay, but it's got to be sort of self-effacing and not something where you're just trying to make a joke by using somebody else's name in place. And if it doesn't work in your own voice, move on. So in terms of selling a customer, you got to know your audience. No, and that involves research. Now, I knew my audience was people 55 or older, right? I know that we're going to tell stories to our grandkids. I don't have any yet, but I hope to do that someday. And in book, they talk about situational fluency, which comes from being very well prepared. So you've done the speech so many times that, yeah, you can do it in your sleep. And always leave time for questions. I do plan to do that. I'm not going to talk for more than 75 minutes, I promise. And the way I get myself going is through exercise, a walk in the woods or swimming today. I had another idea for another thing. You know, you get good ideas when you're working out. And walking is a great way. I've joined Toastmasters, and it does help me have a little discipline to this idea of telling stories, because people actually grade my stories and count my ums, all right? And I do the same thing for them. I would like to urge you all to write every day if you can. You know, just keep a pad, paper, and somewhere where you're going to be having some free time, and make sure you're always writing something down. Just write about your day if need be. Observe your world. I'm a big fan of discussion groups, and my dad and I used to go to one at his church with the old men talking, you know. Okay, well, that was fun. And there's writing groups. HAST has a writing group that's actually meeting after, I think, later today. And if the Toastmasters weekly rigmarole, it is, you know, 7:30 in the morning for my group, and some of them meet during happy hour. I don't know what they do, but there's the ability anytime to just put yourself in a situation where weekly you go back to this. You go back to this once a week and write a journal if no stories are coming to mind. Just write what you're doing. The unexamined life is not worth living comes from Socrates. Remember, he's the guy who said we shouldn't write anything down, but he did write this one down. And Emerson talked in terms of following your inner voice and don't conform to society or religion. So you have a voice, and I know that you're going to get her done like Larry the Cable Guy, or just do it like Nike says. Now, Moth has a website, and I pulled this down off the Moth website, which is a little bit eye chart, I know. And most of the stuff on the right are the don'ts, the no-nos. You've heard about those. The one thing I want to read is what we do want. We want to hook us in, make us care about you, paint the scene, clearly state your fears, desires. What's the dilemma? Make us invested in the outcome, introduce the conflict, make us worried, you impress us. Oh, make us worried for you and impress us with observations that are uniquely yours. Rope us into the moment when it all goes down and conclude as a different person. And yeah, so you're going to write a story, and you're going to end, at the end, you're going to be triumphant, defeated, befuddled, or something. And I think that's something that applies to all the stories we're going to be telling. So the do's for this session: mine your past for tales, sum it up and make it flow. I do recommend that you take some walks, and that'll help you polish your story. And we'll you should be able to read it or tell it from memory in this case. If you want to take some notes and bring them, that's fine. If you're going to write it all down. The don'ts are, we don't want filler words, we want pauses. Try not to trigger your PTSD. And cursing is for sailors and comics, not for us. All right, it'll be 2 pages or so, something you've had happen. It's something for your life, something that's worth sharing, and also create at least 1 limerick to share. And remember, that's a 5 syllables, 7 syllables, 5 syllables. Oh, haiku. Did I say limerick? Oh my gosh, I'm saying limerick. I didn't mean that. I mean a haiku. I'll edit that out. It's the Irish in me coming out here. So, and if you want to write a limerick, go for it. You mine your memory for moving or funny, interesting tales. You could be something you told a child or a niece or a nephew or a grandkid. I think all of us might have a story of how we transitioned out of retirement and had a second life, right? So we will be forming groups of 4 and we'll discuss each student's story and limerick. Yes, indeed. And haikus. And frankly, there was a slide missing, so I'm going to tell a story that I didn't manage to get into this slides. So it must be in a different version. My grandfather was a great storyteller, but he also gave us good stories because he would have us. We lived next door to him. My mom moved there next to his farm. And the 3 of us, my 3 little brothers and I, were all signed to be his labor, right? So we're going to fill in some holes in the backyard, the back of the 40, and we have a big trailer filled with rock. And it's attached to a tractor. And Grandpa says, all right, get on the tractor, boy. And I hop on the hitch. My brothers each hop on the wheel well, and my grandfather starts the engines, and he takes off the jerk, and my little brother falls, and the wheels run over him. And I said, Grandpa, you're running over Mike. So he thought, I better put it in reverse, and he backed over him, which taught me the importance of verb choice, because if I had said, Grandpa, you ran over Mike, stop, it would have been a better, in hindsight, that would have been better. The same grandfather had a big fire in the same location. Basically, it wasn't a cart this time, it was a pile of brush. And as the pile of brush was burning, he decided to take a can of Coleman lighter fluid we had for campouts, which is almost like rocket fuel, and he poured it and immediately wicked up to the can, which he threw, and it sat there pouring out fire for a while. The other thing he did, which these were learning experiences for us of how not to try to kill yourself, right? He's got a ladder on a big tree limb hanging over the same area in his farm, actually. Oh, it's funny, all the things, it must have been evil leprechaun were living underground there that made him do dumb things in the same place over and over. And he put the ladder up and went up with an operating chainsaw, and he's going to cut it, but he's putting his chainsaw on the inside of the ladder. It means he's going to fall and behead himself with a chainsaw. Now, the rules, we have 1 kid holding a rope for the limb to make sure it doesn't hit the house. That's why he was taking it down. He thought it would hit the house. And then my other brother and I are holding the ladder. And while he's doing this, we thought, Grandpa, no! And we yelled, but he couldn't hear us because of the chainsaw. So we decided we'll violate the OSHA rule of ladder holders, which is we'll shake the ladder while somebody's holding an operating chainsaw, which is not a good idea. And we knew it wasn't a good idea. And he yelled at us as he pulled the stop on the chainsaw. What are you doing, lads? And you're cutting on the wrong side. Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I would have fallen to my death. Thank you for that. So you could take those 3 anecdotes, right? And you take all 3 of those and you give a starting to give a little backstory on why this crazy Irishman had a farm at all. And I left a little part out. My grandmother is always inside making lunch for us when these things happen. So at every turn, there's a woman inside hearing him running over his grandchildren or throwing a bomb in her general direction, or, running a chainsaw, not running a chainsaw and screaming at his grandchild. He hears this all inside and keep wondering, what is he doing to him now? So there is a woman who can't believe she married this man. So anyway, I've probably not gone my whole 75, but I did want time for questions. So yes, ma'am.
Waiting for that story, but you clicked. Oh, I'm sorry. I was just saying, I was anxiously waiting for you to tell that story because I saw it and I think you clicked 2 slides.
Yeah.
So I was like, okay.
Where was it?
But it shows you proof of you building anticipation for what's to come, because I've been sitting here waiting for that story.
Where was that? Oh, yeah, it was my mother pouring cold with lighting fluid. Yes, that's right.
Would you tell us about Toastmasters?
Oh, sure. There's Toastmasters. One of your frequent speakers, Fred Johnson from Hope College, is in the Holland Toastmasters, and he could probably introduce you to that group. There's probably a couple in Holland. There's 3 up in the Grand Haven area, but that's a little farther to drive. And I go to one in Grand Haven. The basic idea of Toastmasters is to hone your ability to tell stories and speak. There are a lot of corporate vice presidents who are there because they have to speak to the board, or United Airlines pilots who are involved in things. A lot of teachers join because they want to be able to, they want to be comfortable speaking before a bunch of kids, right? The way we set up our meeting is like a Robert's Rules of Order type meeting, and we say the Pledge of Allegiance, we have an inspiration, we then have the speakers, and someone will be assigned to grade. Each person has an assignment. So the assignment, you might be the counting of the Rs or the odds, or you could be the timer, because everything is timed and you have to learn how to speak within your allotted time. On Moth, they'll kick you off the stage at 6 minutes if you're overtime. So for me, I was, when I was a busy lawyer, I'd try to go and failed to go because I was traveling internationally a lot. Now that I'm semi-retired and can actually make it weekly, although I haven't gone for a month because I've been traveling in California. It's a very good discipline for me to, get there and speak. And there's a wide variety of people who come. I mean, some people are just, we have one gal, she's a retired teacher, I think, and she just comes because she likes to hear stories and tell stories. And, it's like, okay, well, more power to you. So it's a good thing that I have joined it, because I did a climate change presentation, for example, and I thought it was an important enough issue that I only had 7 minutes to sum it up. And I was like, God, this is hard. And I ran it by 3 different Toastmaster groups, one in Muskegon and a couple in Grand Haven, just to make sure, first of all, I didn't even know if I was making it too technical, right? So that people couldn't understand it. I knew I'd get a pretty broad slice of folks at a Toastmaster club. So it did help me kind of make it sensible, and it made for a much better speech when I finally gave it. And I got a lot of good comments from, my speech was good and other people rambled. I was like, how do you ramble in 7 minutes and say anything? But they did. Other questions? Yes, go ahead. She's got a second one.
Would you comment on David Sedaris?
Oh,
his
David
talk?
Sedaris is actually a good friend of my best friend in the world is in Chicago and owns a theater. And he's actually a storyteller who has his own storytelling LGBTQ club of storytellers down there that has a very good Outspoken, it's called. His best friend is David Sedaris. So David stays at his house. I got to meet David once when I was staying there too. And David is one of the storytellers who's really made it good ever since he did Santaland Diaries, which is my go-to listen every Christmas, and he's written some books. He's certainly very good. If you ever seen him in public speaking, he's an excellent humorous speaker. So, and he minds his family for everything, and they haven't sued him yet. So, Oh, here we go.
Yes, I just had a comment about your stories about your grandfather, the
Yeah.
dangerous things that he did. Have you ever heard of the Darwin Awards?
Oh, yeah, the Darwin Awards. Sure, I certainly have. There's something that I've seen the Darwin Awards being given to a lot of people who do stupid things like try to dynamite fish, and it's no way to ice fish, I can tell you. Yes, sir.
So my wife and I have an RV and we go on these trips. It could be a week, it could, lately it's been a month. And I write a journal of things that are happening as we
Mhm.
go, and I'm just jotting down words, or we might go. We're in Minnesota and we go by, the sign says the Spam Museum. I might just write Spam Museum, like how the heck can you have a Spam Museum? I mean,
They have
what are we talking about? So then I come back and I start writing it as a journal, and I find it to be interesting to me, but boring. You know?
Yeah.
Any ideas or tricks to make it a little bit more interesting? I don't know if anybody's ever going to read it, so I don't know why I really care. Maybe the kids or the grandkids might read it one day, but any way to make just a typical writing more interesting.
Yeah, well, I bet David Sedaris could have a field day with the Spam Museum. So, don't just drive by, go in and see what the weirdness is, and don't be afraid to embrace things that are a little off the beaten path. And it's hard to say, how do you make it interesting? The trick is to build in there's got to be some conflict. And so if you're just telling the story of your life and there isn't it, and you don't have any conflicting elements, that's not going to get anybody's attention. Your conflict could be, I can't tell an interesting story, so figure out how to make that into a conflict that you can make it. Sorry. Okay, he's next.
I think I'm next.
Oh, okay, well,
Over here. I just was thinking with the stories of your grandfather, I
Yeah.
just wanted to throw out there, is there any reason why we should ask you why you did not grow up to be a farmer?
oh, well, I frankly still do gardening. And actually my clients are almost entirely farmers. So it's funny, I did grow up to be a lawyer for farmers. And when I was in high school, maybe, I don't know if it was my grandfather's influence or what, but I didn't join FFA, which you would have thought, that'd be a logical thing to do. I was a Boy Scout, right? Maybe it was just didn't have time. But that in hindsight, my brother's children here have been in FFA, and I see they get a lot of good out of it. I was like, oh. Why I wasn't a farmer, first of all, I didn't have any land to go to, and I also went to law school and figured out I could probably make more money representing farmers and see the world. Yes, sir.
Years ago, I had to give a speech to a group, and I was told I think it was 4 minutes. Okay, and that was it,
Mhm.
because there was a series of speakers. And it was one of the hardest things I had to do, was to work it down to 4 minutes.
Right.
And others didn't. But what do you do? I mean, I know this is part of, I've read it in the book about this, but what techniques have you used to be succinct like that when you have like the Moth Slams, they have a 5-minute limit. I think you said they turn off the mic at a certain point, but what
If
techniques
you've
have
ever
you
been an
found?
editor and been given you give somebody a word count of 750 words and they give you 1,500, you realize there are comments that are expanded into 3 sentences. Could you say the same thing in 5 words? All right. So there's ways to boil things down by just getting the gist of a concept. I had that climate change presentation, which normally I get 20 minutes. I even had 45 minutes on PFAS that I could talk a lot. I could even show a movie trip. Wow. Okay. But then when you're boiled down on a very complex topic to 7 minutes, it does force it's one. Frankly, I practice a lot more for the 7 minutes than I do for the 20 or the 45. Right. So it's practice to see how you could boil it down. There's always a way to make it shorter. Yes, ma'am.
I would like to speak to this gentleman's concern about journaling. I love to write and I write for myself. And just today, I had an experience of unearthing what had been a long history of a letter that was coming in from an organization that we were together in college. And every year we would pool interest and one person would send back the letters from all the rest of the writers and so on. And what I'm doing now is writing to the daughter of one of the members of my college class who is no longer living,
Mhm.
And the daughter had gone through a number of years with her mom who had a severe stroke, and the daughter took over the mother's responsibilities of care and so on. And I'm hoping that writing her about what her mother said about Lynn when she was a little girl growing up will mean a lot to her. And I'm having a lot of fun putting it together.
Yeah, well, I'll commend to you the idea that I've been journaling most of my life, and when I kind of had to clean out my father's shed and get the mice out of my journals and sort through them, I found a letter my mother had written when my brother died in 1981. Very well written letter, and it, of course, made me cry, right? And it was great to see things that I'd been doing during some of my big lawsuits where I'd have trouble with employees and stuff, and how to get around that. And it's something that journaling certainly helped me get through bad times, because I just write it down and think about it. It also helps me to make decisions. When I have to make a big decision, I'll write down 2 options and sleep on it. And you decide to go one way and sleep on that, and decide to go the other way and sleep on that. Mhm. Yeah, no, and it's great to get a little slice of your life 20 years ago. Yes, sir.
There were question about how do you say within the time? I used to help educators figure out how to do presentations and so forth. And one of the things that happens is people just start out trying to say too much. They have 12 things they want to say in 3 minutes. And one of the strategies is only try to say 2 things in 3 minutes. And that can be a big help.
Yeah, pick the most important thing and try to get it. These are all great questions. Thank you for having them ready.
I'm sorry, I'm back.
No,
again.
there's no limit on questions here.
I never had children, and I love being with children, and I find small kids, when you ask them, you want to hear stories from them, they'll just chatter on and on and on. But once they reach adolescence, it's very difficult, I find, to get an adolescent. You ask them, well, what have you been doing? And they'll just say, oh, nothing. And do you have any tips on how to encourage adolescents to tell their stories?
Oh, boy, I tell you, I'd get a Nobel Prize if I could figure that one out. I do think, though, when you're an adolescent, you've got a lot more going on in your head these days, and you're afraid to saying something dumb. You're afraid to, say something offensive, whatever. It just could be that they're just, afraid that you'll judge them. So may be good to share some of your stories and kind of get them seeing the benefit of talking. Yes, sir.
We have granddaughters, and my wife will ask specific questions instead of how was your day, which all 4 of our kids hated. Why do you always ask how my day was? But specifics about who's your friend, something that they have the answer to, and then play off of that. Now, my wife is better at that than I am, but that's how she gets progress.
I will caution you, though, don't be my brother, because for some reason, my brother, the high-tech executive, and my cousin's 2 boys, thought he just asked too many questions. We couldn't stand it. And they loved me. I mean, one of the kids asked for me for Christmas. He was like, I want to go see Tom for Christmas. I was like, what? You can go see my sister Margot in San Diego. I'll meet you there, because this is the strangest thing I've ever seen. But my brother was a prober, right? And he didn't know when to stop. So I think you have to be careful, you don't want to step on anybody's toes. There's an endless string of questions.
I had a great aunt who had no children, and she would come to see us. And I remember when I was probably 13, and I don't know what I was doing in my room, but she came in and she sat on the bed and she said, now, she started commenting about my clothes and asking me how I put my makeup on. And she was so interested in me, sincerely. And I truly was charmed and probably had a lovely conversation with her.
I just have a comment for this woman here, how to get adolescents to answer your questions. Because our boys got to the point at family dinner, which we insisted on having together as much as we could. How was your day? Fine. So we made it into a game and we spun, actually it was a knife, a table knife, we'd spin it and whoever it would point to got to ask anyone at the table any question and they had to answer it. And they loved the game and it just inspired so much conversation between them and us. And we still do it to this day. They're 30 and 29. So
Well, you ought to call Milton Bradley and see if you can get a game trademark.
I have a couple granddaughters. And at one point I figured out that there was no way I could buy gifts for them anymore because it was just too hard. So I said, let's go shopping. And I would get them one-on-one. And I would come back home and tell my daughter, yeah, Abby just talked all the time. She said, she did? I said, yeah, we were doing something together. And then we would go and have lunch or supper or something like that. Talk, 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 talk. So do an activity with them.
Yeah, you might want to consider writing that granddaughter up as your narrative for next week. How to make a child talk. Yeah.
I have a granddaughter also who is in medical school right now, but I give her extra money and each quarter, and she will write me a story of all of the activities that went on in that quarter, all in one narrative back to me in thanks for what I had done for her.
Uh-huh. So that's nice. Oh, come on.
So
Somebody else wants to-
are we going to be writing and sharing next week, or is this classroom going to be
Yeah, and since
empty?
I actually said limerick instead of haiku, if anybody wants to write a limerick instead of haiku, feel free.
I mean, what Tom and I were thinking is that writing a story and sharing it in front of the large group would be pretty intimidating. So we thought if we break into smaller groups of 4, that you could share your stories and I would be the timer. And then from there, 5 minutes each, right?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then from there, if anybody wanted to share with the bigger group, we can do that. So does that, can you put a thumbs up or a thumbs down so we know that we can do this?
I don't want to send everybody running from the room.
Right,
but,
right.
I
And then
think
the
a
other,
little practice would probably be
Right.
to it.
and then the other thing is, I don't think this would be a session like the Moth where we would critique each other.
Right.
You're just
Oh, yeah, this is not
Yeah.
who's going to write the best story at all.
at this
It's more,
point,
you gotta show us you can actually
right?
apply
Just
and try to apply some of the ideas that we talked about. See if you can foreshadow. Write me a mystery, whatever. So there's got to be something.
eventually, I would like to have a Moth slam with past.
Well,
No,
we
I'm
could all get
serious.
together and have a glass of wine somewhere in a month from now.
Yeah, that sounds really good. I'm just curious about having to speak spontaneously. I've had the experience where I've heard people speak, read what they had to say, and it has been laboriously boring.
Mhm.
But I have also heard people speak where they're using a script. And if I didn't see them, I wouldn't know that they were
Because
working
it's too
off the script.
incoherent and there's no narrative structure to it. And
Well, I guess I'm thinking it's there's an economy of words that come from reading. You say what you're going to say. You have less of a tendency to wander.
Mhm.
You have less of a tendency to go off on tangents. And I don't know, my experience is that can be pretty effective.
I forgot to mention Toastmasters, we have a thing where we have extemporaneous speaking. You have 2 minutes, you're given a topic, not of your own making, and you have to talk for 2 minutes about it. And I found that actually a very good prompt to my own ability to come up with things on the spot. You know, it's a good practice to try to do that. And you could do that at home. You could sit down with your wife and say, we each get to ask each other to tell us about something, and I get to make up a story. You get to make up a story on the spot.
One question from our virtual
Yeah.
viewers was, how will virtual attenders share their stories next week?
We're going to try to create breakout groups. We do this all the time in the American Bar Association when we're forced by COVID to turn our conferences, which had a lot of breakouts, into sessions. So I've asked Ian McNeil to set up foursomes online, and that is what we're going to try to do. Have a breakout instruction, and you click with your mouse on the little, yes, I'm joining this breakout room, and then you'll have 4 disembodied heads talking to each other about their stories online. So assuming Ian works that out in the coding of the different, the figuring out the program the way the ABA does, and I'll put him in touch with my ABA staffers if he can't figure it out. So we'll make sure that happens.
But they're welcome to come to class.
Oh, and you can always come in person.
Yeah.
Wear a mask if you're afraid of COVID.
Yeah.
Oh, yes, sir. Oh, wait. Yeah, but say that so everybody can hear it online too.
Finish the book.
Yes, please finish the book. Well, we have 2 minutes left till we're done. Anybody, you got one last question? Hi, Roseanne.